Hello, everybody. On your Wednesday, welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney.
I'm Mike Polk Jr., and you are watching Ohio's best show about Ohio politics. And see, that's fair for me to say. It can't be disproven because it's subjective, and that's my opinion.
There you go. And this is not an opinion. It is 76 days until Election Day, which is wild to think about.
Wow, that is. It's creeping up on us real fast. We got to get these people prepared.
We do. We have a packed show for you today, and one of the main things we'll be talking about today is national news. Ohio keeps making national news, and this is about the ballot language associated with the redistricting amendment that will be on the ballot in November.
I wish we were making national news for like having the best maple syrup or something like that of all the states, but it's usually something like this. And in this case, they're mucking around with the ballot language, and we're going to talk about that.
It is controversy. So you actually will be speaking. Mike speaks with Chris Davey of Citizens Not Politicians.
We reached out to them, and we also reached out to Frank LaRose's office.
And gave them the option of an interview or to answer some questions via email. So we got some responses from them via email. So we will share that.
We're also going to give you a Senate race update. Obviously, as you know, we are the nexus of the universe in Ohio. We have one of the most important Senate races that could determine the balance of the Senate. So we'll bring you up to date on what's going on with those characters.
We will, and we will have your vice presidential update because you know one of the vice presidential candidates is your Ohio Senator, J.D. Vance.
Ohio boy. Yep. Right here.
But first, from what I understand, big thing going on in Chicago this week.
Yeah,
the
the
Democratic
DNC.
National Convention.
Very fun. But I do have a bone to pick before we go any further. And this has to do with Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who tried to get away with something last night when he was accepting when he was announcing his state's nominee choice. So take a look at this.
The great state of Illinois, the prairie state, home of 4 presidents, including President Barack Obama. The birthplace of skyscrapers and the adopted home of Superman.
How dare he? Poppycock and balderdash, that's what I'd call it, folks. Here's what he was referring to, though. Apparently, Metropolis is a city in Illinois. They got that name. It's Superman. They call it Superman's official DC Comics approved hometown. They even passed like one of those adorable state decrees declaring it such and whatnot. That's enough of that. You can come back to the important, to the goods here, Bede. And that is outrageous because we all know that Superman is from Cleveland.
Obviously.
He was created right here in Glenville neighborhood by a couple of Cleveland boys, and you can't just claim it because you want to have that. But I also found out that they have like a Superman convention every year. They get like 20,000 weirdos to come there to celebrate Superman. We need those weirdos here coming to our town.
Yeah, we do.
So anyways, that upset me, but I'm willing to look past it in the spirit of, unanimity.
I can tell you're really upset.
I'm sorry.
It's obviously troubling, but don't worry.
But
we'll
really,
get
that's
past
our
it.
guy. They even have a statue. We have a statue.
Okay, we're going to have to talk to somebody about this. We're going to have to put in some calls and emails.
All right.
Let's get to your vice presidential update, though. Which
That'll calm me down.
might calm you down. It might calm you down. And speaking of the DNC, Governor Tim Walz from Minnesota, he'll be speaking tonight, Wednesday, after former President Bill Clinton. And we can confirm that there will be a debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. That's happening on October 1st. That's when that's scheduled for.
Good to know.
Okay, so here's some information about J.D. Vance related to Tim Walz. There's been some criticism coming from J.D. Vance toward Tim Walz, and it's over the fertility struggles that his family has experienced. So NBC News reported this, and J.D. Vance is saying that Tim Walz lied about his wife undergoing IVF when she underwent IUI. Mike, is that crystal clear to you?
I don't totally understand what the how we're differentiating this.
Okay.
But please go on.
So I will explain this for people who are not familiar with these acronyms. IVF stands for in vitro fertilization. IUI stands for intrauterine insemination. I'm sure that's really crystal clear to everyone now, right?
It's also my fantasy football team name.
IVF versus IUI. Okay, so J.D. Vance is quoted as saying this: "It's just such a bizarre thing to lie about, right? There's nothing wrong with having a baby through IVF or not having a baby through IVF. Like, why lie about it? I just don't understand that." This is something he said to reporters in Milwaukee. He went on to say, quote, "Anybody who's had a friend or themselves on fertility treatment, you know the difference." Now, Doctors have disagreed with this statement from J.D. Vance. They say it's really common parlance to talk about fertility treatments in general using the terminology IVF, but what he's doing here is getting into the difference between IVF and IUI. The main difference between IVF and IUI is that in IVF you actually have to have a procedure to have eggs taken out of your body so that they can be fertilized outside of your body. In IUI, that's when sperm is injected into a woman's uterus. So the eggs are not removed, but there still is an injection happening, which also happens in IVF. So it's an earlier step in the process for people who are experiencing fertility struggles.
But it's also just another fertility treatment that people can take advantage of when they're having trouble conceiving currently.
Correct.
And from what I understand, a lot of the bills that would limit those fertility treatments would include limiting that as well. So when he was speaking about that, from personal experience, it was something that probably would be prohibited under the same thing that would prohibit IVF.
It was certainly relevant, and as a reminder, J.D. Vance and many Republicans have voted against Democratic legislation that would protect IVF treatments. The reason IVF treatments are a question now is because of the overturn of Roe versus Wade, and there is debate on what to do with fertilized embryos because of the conversations at the state level now of when something is to be considered life and when that happens. Now, embryo fertilization is very early in the process. You're talking days into the process. Now, Tim Walz has never directly said that he and his wife had their children via IVF, but some of his past statements have implied that was the case when speaking generally about it. So there was a comment from his campaign. Mia Ehrenberg, a spokesperson for the Hares Walz campaign, said in a statement Tuesday that Walz was, quote, using commonly understood shorthand for fertility treatments in his previous comments, and then went on to say, quote, the Trump campaign's attacks on Mrs. Walz are just another example of how cruel and out of touch Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are when it comes to women's health care. So this all kind of came about, by the way, because of an interview that Mrs. Walz gave to Glamour magazine.
Okay, well, it does seem like they're parsing words a bit there, but you can see that they're still trying to kind of find a way in at the vice presidential candidate Walz, because I think they're having a hard time making anything stick. They've tried a bunch of different attacks, and now they are trying to call his credibility into account, which is always like a harder thing to do when the top of your ticket is somebody who, the former president, who's known for stretching the truth quite a bit. So I think that makes the argument a little bit more difficult to make, but they're still swinging.
They sure are. Okay, let's move on to the Senate race here in Ohio, which is a big one. There's some new data out there.
Yeah, that's right. We've had very little polling up until now, which has just been crazy to us because it's such an important race. But for whatever reason, there hasn't been a lot of polling, but there is a new poll up. I think we can show it here. This is a new Rasmussen poll that shows Senator Sherrod Brown leading Republican challenger Bernie Moreno in November. And that is according to, again, Rasmussen, which is a conservative-leaning polling place, by the way. Poll of 1,267 likely voters in Ohio, conducted from August 13th to August 17th. This is recent. Shows Brown with a 5-point lead with 47% of the vote against Moreno's 52%.
42%.
I'm sorry, 42%.
And maybe that other 1%, I don't know if it says where that's going here, but potentially to Don Kissick, who we'll talk about in a moment, who's the Libertarian candidate.
Big Don, the Libertarian candidate. But there's, and take it with a grain of salt, obviously. People have different opinions about polling, and I don't know the methodology or anything like that, but it was interesting to finally see just some numbers finally, and I'm surprised we haven't seen more.
Yeah. All right, more national news. We'll talk now about an article that came out in Mother Jones, which is a national organization that considers itself to be a bit of a watchdog group.
Certainly a bit progressive, in fairness.
It is, if you check the media bias fact check, it is listed as left-leaning.
Yep.
There is a response from his campaign here, so we will share the reporting. The headline of this: Bernie Moreno says he built his car dealer empire all on his own. The reality is more complicated. So what this article does is it details some significant help that Moreno got in building that car dealership empire. And a lot of this comes from a 2014 lawsuit in South Florida. And the crux of this lawsuit is two neighboring dealerships. He had operated at that time a dealership in South Florida, and two neighboring dealerships lodged an official protest with the Florida Department of Highway Safety. They said that Nissan was granting special favors to Moreno. And at the hearing that fall, Moreno was a star witness. So we actually have some quotes directly from him. He said that he got his start when he spent about $2 million of his own money in 2005 to buy a Mercedes-Benz dealership here in Ohio in North Olmsted. And when he was talking about acquiring that dealership, here's a quote from Moreno. What happens was they wanted a minority operator there. So in summarizing his words, he said that Mercedes arranged for the owner of that dealership to, quote, sell that dealership for a dramatically reduced price in exchange for Mercedes giving that owner an open point in Chandler, Arizona. Then he said that the big car companies, quote, were under a lot of pressure to have the dealer body be diverse, be representative of the community. And so I'm certain at that time when they may have been getting pressure to have more diversity among their dealership ranks, have the dealer body be diverse, be representative of the community. Now, during his Senate campaign, Moreno has talked about being against wokeness and referred to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as, quote, a new form of racism. So that seems in contrast to what he personally experienced by his own admission in testimony related to this lawsuit.
It would seem so.
So here's a quote from the Moreno campaign. As he has said time and again, Bernie believes that merit should always be the singular factor in these decisions, period. His dealerships perform to the highest standard, and he believes that success should be the only factor for hiring practices, promotions, and business dealings. As Bernie has said time and again, his family did not give him a cent to start his own business. He took a huge financial risk on his own to build a wildly successful car business. So that article is, again, by Mother Jones. If you're interested, I would recommend you read the full article because there's a lot more nuance and details in there.
A couple of things. First of all, I remember reading about that story during the primary, so this isn't like a new revelation. This is something that we've already known. Doesn't make it irrelevant by any means, and the fact that it's coming out now, it's just, as you said, the contrast there is what gets people's attention. It's the fact that he himself has acknowledged benefiting from DEI program, essentially a DEI program, but now condemns it. And I think that it's that hypocrisy that article is attempting to point out.
Mm-hmm. And that is an excellent point. Some of those quotes were first reported by the Business Insider in March. So not necessarily new information, but Mother Jones has recently picked it up, which is a national organization.
Now, speaking of the Senate race, we have a senator in Ohio who should probably, he must be at the DNC right now. The largest gathering of Democrats is Sherrod Brown at the DNC, and how's it going for him there?
He's actually not at the DNC. Yeah, he made a comment related to skipping conventions that was reported by CNN. It was picked up, and kind of dive into that a little bit because he has actually been at every DNC since at least 1996 up until now. So let's check that out. With the November election getting closer, all eyes are on Ohio and its hotly contested Senate race between Democratic incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown and Republican challenger Bernie Moreno. Recently, Brown made news by saying he wouldn't be at the Democratic National Convention, and CNN quoted him as saying, "I often skip conventions." So let's verify whether that's true. Our sources are CNN, Cleveland.com, NBC News, the DNC, and C-SPAN, Sherrod Brown's social media account, and his campaign. The DNC happens every 4 years, timed up with presidential elections. So we'll look at every DNC since Sherrod Brown started representing Ohio in Washington, D.C. in 1993. Cleveland.com's Andrew Tobias confirmed that state news coverage reported that Brown was at the DNC in 1996, 2000, and 2004. NBC News reporting shows he was a speaker at the 2008 DNC in Denver. A social media post from Brown shows he was at the 2012 DNC in Charlotte. He spoke at the 2016 DNC in Philadelphia, and he appeared in a video featured in the virtual DNC in 2020, which was shared on C-SPAN. All of this shows that up until now, Brown has either been at or been a part of every DNC since at least 1996. We asked Brown's campaign about this apparent discrepancy, and they shared this extended audio clip of his quote from the CNN interview.
You go to the convention?
I go to the convention. I often skip conventions. I mean, I'll go maybe a day sometimes. I don't plan to.
So we can verify Brown's partial quote saying, "I often skip conventions," included in CNN's story needs context, as the extended clip includes the senator explaining what he meant while confirming that he doesn't plan to be at the DNC at all this year. Reeves Oyster from Brown's campaign told me, quote, "We've been planning to be in Ohio for months, and Sherrod is looking forward to hearing from Ohioans in Youngstown, Toledo, Cleveland, Chillicothe, and Sandusky next week to discuss his record fighting for the dignity of work." And to clarify, sitting this one out isn't about the presidential candidate. The campaign said the senator endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris after President Joe Biden dropped out of the race, and he supports her candidacy. So that's what we received from the campaign related to that. And again, he has been and will be throughout this week in Youngstown, Toledo, Niles, Cleveland, Chillicothe, and Sandusky here in Ohio.
Hearing him try to not answer whether he was going to go to the thing sounded like someone trying to get an answer out of me if I was coming to their party that I don't want to go to. And I was just like, we're to see how it shakes out. Maybe, you know, ideally I would be there, maybe for a stop by, but no guarantees. All right, that's it, bye. That's how I try to get out of that situation. Should point out, though, obviously, people are trying to make a little bit of hay of this, the fact that a sitting senator, Democratic senator is not willing to go there. She says it's so a lack of support, but really, it's pragmatism, I guess, is what most people are guessing it is, because he lives in a red state right now, and he's trying to win a Senate seat. And I think that they're making some exceptions, including, and he's not the only one. As a reminder, we also have John Tester in Montana, who did not attend as well. He actually went to do a fundraiser with some members from Pearl Jam for his campaign instead of the DNC. That was what.
Maybe he prefers that to the musical
That
lineup.
sounds all right to me. And then also Jackie Rosen, who's from Nevada, is in a tight race, and she also did not appear at the DNC. He's fine. He'll be all right. Now, I also do have to point this out, though, in the spirit of fairness, too. We did hear a lot of feedback about who wasn't there at the DNC, but I didn't hear quite as much about who wasn't at the RNC, and that's a pretty interesting list as well, I
Sure,
think.
yeah.
List of Republicans who did not attend this year's RNC in Milwaukee. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who says she won't support Donald Trump. Senator Todd Young of Indiana, who says the same. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who said the same. She will not support Trump. Senator Mitt Romney also will not endorse Trump. He wasn't there. He said, quote, "It's a matter of personal character." A couple of other notable no-shows at the RNC. Former Vice President Mike Pence, Donald Trump's former vice president, he said he won't endorse Trump. But that's not the only Veep who wasn't there, Republican Veep. Dick Cheney was also not there, neither was Dan Quayle. And finally, the only other living Republican U.S. president than Trump, George W. Bush, also did not attend. So that's a list of people as well who just didn't want to show up there. So I think that's also relevant.
Definitely. Okay, let's mention the third Senate candidate here in the state of Ohio. His name is Don Kissick. He is a Libertarian.
There he is.
That's a photo of him from circa 2020. Actually, Joe Jorgensen, a Libertarian presidential candidate at the time, is cropped out of that photo because photos of him are kind of sparse to come by. So not a lot of information out there about
It's
Don
so
Kissick.
Libertarian to not have much of a footprint online. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can tell you this. His most recent tweet is still from last week when we talked about how well he did on the Wordle.
Look at that.
Last Wednesday.
That's still, so this is your update on his social media presence. He's still just celebrating that Wordle dunk.
He got it done in 2. Well, let's see how it compared to Mike's Wordle success that day.
Oh, son of a gun.
In 3.
I know, but I came in strong.
You did.
Obviously, and then, by the third thing, but, got beat by Don, obviously. How'd you do that day, by the way?
I got it in 4.
Oh, and why aren't we showing yours again?
Because I just thought it would distract from the show.
You used the word grope, and she didn't want to put that on TV. She thought it was inappropriate. And
It was the best combination of letters.
I understand. I don't think that there was anything inappropriate about it. You're trying to win Wordle. You got to get your hands dirty sometimes.
No, isn't it fun when he surprises me?
So, but anyways, we commend you. We still commend your Wordle skills, even if we don't know much more about you.
Great job on that, Don Kissick. I wonder how he's been doing since then. In any case, now we will move on to your Ohio rundown. So here's a little bit of news from around the state of Ohio. We can tell you Governor Mike DeWine has come down with COVID again.
3 times, from what I understand. Actually, the first time was a false positive back in 2020, but we all thought he had it, and this is back when we were like, we're going to lose him. But we, because it was still extremely new and we didn't know what was going on.
Right.
But that ended up being a false positive. Then he got it for real, and now apparently he's got it again. Huh?
Yeah, so he tested positive Tuesday morning. He is taking that fancy Paxlovid, that antiretroviral medication that was prescribed by his doctor. He's working from home the rest of this week. We hope you get better soon.
Can we all have that, or is that just for like the wealthy and people who are ranking high in government? Can everybody have that?
There are only certain people who it makes sense for. It
I
doesn't
see.
make
The
sense
wealthy?
for everyone.
No, I'm kidding. I don't really know where we're at with the treatments, but so he's going to be working from home for the rest of the week.
Yes.
Get well soon.
It's the word on the street. All right, another big announcement this week. Dr. Amy Acton announced a possible governor run, kind of a soft announcement.
This was a Jeremy Pelzer bomb.
Yeah, from Cleveland.com,
From
friend of the show.
Cleveland.com. Yep, friend of the show. And so what do you think about that? Is this going to happen?
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, she says she's thinking about it. You know, Jeremy happened to be, I think, kind of right place, right time. It was at the Ohio's Democratic National Convention breakfast. said she hasn't made a final decision, but she is focused on some key things in this election. She wants to help the Democratic Ohio Supreme Court candidates and also focusing on redistricting, which we'll be talking a lot about today.
Yes, and good luck to you, Dr. Amy, whatever you decide to do. But this has been the scuttlebutt for a little bit around town that she might be taking a swing at it. I thought she might have thrown her hat in the ring back in 2022, but you know, we'll see. It's always interesting to have new players on the field, and she certainly has some name recognition.
And this is her quote: "I have experience, I just want to give back, and this is a time of life where I can."
Cool.
Now here's some news that I thought was really interesting for the state of Ohio, Northeast Ohio. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson will be speaking in Cleveland on Monday, September 16th with the City Club.
That's awesome.
It
very cool.
is not every day that a United States Supreme Court justice comes to town.
If you don't know, just real quick, the City Club is it's a social club in Cleveland where they have special guests in and talk about issues, and they have a lunch, and they will have like people come in from out of town. Former presidents have done it, a lot of politicians, but also artists and whatnot. And so they come in, they talk for about a half an hour, and then they answer a half hour of questions.
And so this is a forum happening. Also a lunch. The doors open at 11. The lunch is at 11:30. Things start at 12. There will be questions after the fact. It's at the Huntington Convention Center. How much do you think tickets would cost for something like that?
I mean, I would hope that it would be free to the public for an educational experience and be some sort of a lottery system.
This is going to sound less impressive now that you've said that.
What is it?
$55. I
Woo-hoo.
thought that was a reasonable amount. You think that's high?
It is a reasonable amount, but I do question if everybody if everyone who would want to see her is able to get in there at that price point. Luckily, it's not my problem, but I'm sure that the money also goes to support the City Club or something. I don't think Ketanji Brown Jackson's just taking it and shoving it in her robe and running back to D.C. or anything like that. So, but I'm sure it's a good cause. But I just hope that that's not too high of a bar for some people who that's a lot of money.
That's true. I hope so too. Maybe there'll be some element. I'm not sure if this will happen. Maybe there'll be an element of streaming the forum, or it'll be available after the fact. I know that WKYC in Cleveland plans to cover it, so there will be some news coverage of it.
Yeah, I'll sneak my phone in and I'll show it to everybody, regardless of whether we have the rights.
Live stream it on Twitch.
Yep, no problem.
This is, I should mention, by the way, she will be speaking about her new memoir, which is called Lovely One, and it's about her journey from segregation to her historic confirmation on the Supreme Court.
She's pushing a book. We should have known. She doesn't really love us that much. No, I'll take it. We'll still take it.
Welcome,
Thank you. Thanks for
welcome
choosing
to
us.
Cleveland in advance, Justice Brown.
Okay, what's next?
Now to the main topic of conversation for the day, the redistricting amendment ballot language controversy.
This is exhausting.
It is a lot.
Tell them about it, please.
We got to get you up to speed here a little bit, okay? So, Citizens Not Politicians is the name of the group that's supporting this proposed constitutional amendment. They are proposing redistricting reform in the state of Ohio. They have sued the Ohio Ballot Board as a group, and Secretary of State Frank LaRose individually. It's gone to the Ohio State Supreme Court. They're asking for a rewrite of the language that we will all see on our ballots in November when we get the option of whether to vote for this or not.
Well, what's wrong with the language that they suggested?
Well, it was just flat out turned down.
Oh.
The ballot board had some things to say about it, which we'll get to in a little bit, but Citizens Not Politicians is now reacting to the language that the ballot board approved on its own, that came up with on its own. They say it, quote, may be the most biased, inaccurate, deceptive, and unconstitutional the state has ever seen. So, little backstory here. Citizens Not Politicians had to get summary language approved by Attorney General Dave Yost. This was to get the petitions out there, which was the first step in the process to even get this approved to be on the ballot.
In order to circulate the petition, it has to be approved. It got turned down twice for not being accurate and one time for a misspelling. But after 3 times,
The third time it was approved.
The third time it was approved. Thank you.
So
Third time it's approved.
Accuracy was an issue, according to Dave Yost's office. Then there was a typo. The third time it was approved.
But they fixed it. At that point, it's a very massive document still. The petition that you signed is quite large.
7,000 words?
7,000 words sounds right.
I think
yep,
something
about
like that.
7,000 words.
Yeah, so that was also back in October of 2023, okay? So that was a different set of language. Approval of that language is different than approving what will show up on the ballot in November when you go to actually vote and you're trying to figure out what the heck you're voting for.
Because people don't have time to read a 700-page document and see every single thing that's in there, so they have to agree on a summary, an accurate summary of that both reflects it accurately and doesn't confuse people.
Right. So the Ohio Ballot Board met on last Friday, August 16th, to decide ballot language for the election. And that ballot board consists of 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
One of those Republicans is Frank LaRose, the person who wrote the language.
Yes. Now, citizens, not politicians, submitted language, but the board rejected it and wrote and approved its own summary language and a title for the proposed constitutional amendment. That is why we're here today.
That's true. It should be noted, Frank LaRose, in his job on the board, did not vote on that. He had one of his people vote on it instead. So it wasn't actually his name on it. He was doing something else, but he sent somebody, and that person represented him and voted to move it forward. The 2 Democrats on the board did not agree with it and voted against it. And so that's where we're at.
Yeah. And so Michael had a conversation with Chris Davey of Citizens Not Politicians.
And he gave us a little bit more information about what's going on here. Chris, we got ourselves a situation here, don't we, as far as the ballot language goes concerning the very important issue that you guys are approaching. Tell us what exactly is going down and what Frank LaRose is doing to be creative about this process.
Well, creative is an interesting choice of words. Frank LaRose is doing what he's decided he's going to be all about, which is using the power of his office to try and put his finger on the scale and influence the election, which is exactly the opposite of what the Secretary of State is supposed to be doing, is entrusted to be doing by the Ohio voters.
Give us a couple examples of the language that your organization considers to be so deceptive.
Well, it starts with the title of the amendment. It doesn't essentially say what the amendment does and instead focuses on other factors. I mean, look, Frank LaRose has made very clear that he opposes this amendment. And in fact, in the hearing on Friday, he said that redistricting is an inherently political process, is what he said. And in fact, that's exactly what redistricting should not be. And that's what this amendment is all about. By having politicians like Frank LaRose in charge of the redistricting process, it does make it about politics. What the Ohio voters have said, over 500,000 voters in every one of Ohio's 88 counties signed our petitions. And what they've said is, we want to have a system that's run by citizens, not politicians. And what Frank LaRose and the ballot board did on Friday is a clear demonstration for why we need to do that.
He's tried this sort of stuff before, these tactics. In fact, within the last year, 60% amendment, of course you recall, the abortion amendment, in both those, he sort of tried to game the language while talking about how proud he was of how fair the election process was here in Ohio. Both of those times failed pretty miserably. Why do you think he's going back to the well again? And are you worried about it having any chance of success?
Why he's doing it, I don't know. You'd have to talk to him or his psychologist. But we do know that it backfired last year, the August 8th election and the reproductive rights amendment, where Frank publicly said that it was one thing, and then privately he said it was another. They wrote ballot language for the reproductive rights amendment that was longer than the amendment itself and included distorted language, and it backfired. And large numbers of Ohioans saw right through it. They came out, and they had the final say. The voters of Ohio will have the final say here. And no, we're not worried. What this has done is energized our base. We've seen an increase in donations. We've seen an increase in people volunteering. I was on a Zoom last night with former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. Hundreds and hundreds of people showed up to a Zoom call that is usually just a much smaller number, and they were fired up. What they've done here is demonstrate that they're not interested in fairness, they're not interested in transparency, and they're trying to manipulate and you could say rig the election, and we're just not going to stand for it.
That was one of my first thoughts when I saw Secretary LaRose's language was Republican former Supreme Court Justice Chief Maureen O'Connor is one of the main advocates, obviously, for this initiative of yours, and she does not suffer fools and does not seem like something that I just would have liked to have seen her reaction when she saw that language. Can you give us an idea of how she responded?
Well, she wasn't in the room. I was there, and when Senator Teresa Gavarone introduced an amendment to take a anti-gerrymandering amendment and put on the ballot that it is a pro-gerrymandering amendment. There was an audible gasp in the room. People really couldn't even believe the audacity of it. I called Maureen O'Connor afterwards, and yeah, she had some choice words. She is really revolted by this, as are all of us. And it's not going to stand. I mean, we've appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court. We filed a lawsuit yesterday. This is a clear violation of the Constitution and the Ohio Revised Code, both of which require two essential elements for the ballot language. And this is common sense stuff. The ballot language should be accurate. It should be accurate, and it should be impartial. And what they did on Friday is false and misleading and designed to mislead the voters to vote no on this amendment. So we're hopeful that the court will see that.
Not to be cynical, but this now goes to the Ohio Supreme Court, which has a decidedly conservative bent at this point, including the governor's son. Not ideal. So where do you, and this is also the court that shot down 7 different maps with Supreme Court Justice Maureen O'Connor on it. She's now gone. My question is, why do you have faith in the Ohio Supreme Court to do what you consider to be the right thing?
Well, we still are governed by the rule of law in this country. And, I happen to have worked at the Supreme Court for 11 years, and I witnessed internally, how these decisions are done and how the jurists go about doing their jobs. And these are still lawyers and judges who are bound, duty bound by the Constitution and the oath that they took to uphold the Constitution and the laws of Ohio. So we've made our argument before them. The law on this is crystal clear. So we're very hopeful that they'll rule in our favor.
In the event that, for whatever reason, they did not, where would it go from there?
We will go to the ballot on November 5th, and we will help Ohioans to understand that the ballot language is misleading. We'll help them understand what the amendment really does. And I would encourage your viewers and listeners now to go to citizensnotpoliticians.org, where you can read the amendment. And it's pretty straightforward. What the ballot language currently says is the opposite of what the amendment does. And we know that Ohioans will see through it, and we're hopeful that the court will rule in our favor. Regardless, we will go to the ballot on November 5th and we'll win.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Thanks for the update, and good luck as you guys continue your fight.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Good info. Thanks to Chris for the time there.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris. Now, friend of the show, Professor Jonathan Enton, is a constitutional law scholar. He's with Case Western Reserve University School of Law. He and I were emailing back and forth today a little bit about this. There was some particular language I kind of wanted to chat with him about, and here's a quote from him. He said, "There is no universe that I am aware of where this document satisfies the legal requirement that the ballot contain a fair and accurate portrayal of this proposal." Now, what he's referring to right there is the ballot language that was written and approved by Secretary of State Frank LaRose and the ballot board. This is the language that is the subject to the lawsuit. Professor Enton said that the approval frustrated him and that the language included what he called, quote, advocacy words, and he thought the ballot board might have been a bit more subtle in their choice of language. So as I mentioned, we did reach out to Secretary of State Frank LaRose's office, asked for either an interview or to answer some questions via email, and he provided us with a statement.
Here we go. The summary approved by the board is fair and factual, and it accurately identifies the substance of the proposed amendment. We invited and included suggestions from both sides of the debate, as well as from the amendment itself. The group that drafted the amendment has no credibility to complain about whether the summary is truthful, because their own summary had to be rejected twice by the Attorney General as dishonest.
Now I want to take a moment here to clarify that what he is referring to is what we talked about earlier, the petition language summary.
Right.
The summary that they submitted to the ballot board was not rejected by the Attorney General. And I would make a note here as well that it wasn't rejected twice for dishonesty. We know that the second time it was rejected was for a typo.
Okay. We have Frank Rose's next comment here. Ohio voters can read the proposed amendment for themselves by visiting our website at ohiosos.gov, and the ballot board has approved an advertising plan to put the full amendment in newspapers across the state 3 times in all 88 counties between now and the election.
So we look forward to seeing that in publication.
Yep. Hey, congrats to all those newspapers who are getting that that revenue bump, though, I guess.
Yeah, that advertising. Okay, so I did go back and forth a little bit via email with the spokesperson for Secretary of State Frank LaRose. I asked him about the appropriateness of the ballot board creating its own ballot summary language and kind of just the procedure there. Is it common for a ballot board to do this, to create its own language, or is the role more akin to approving or denying, and then if denying, sending back for adjustment? So here's what spokesperson Dan Lushik said. Quote, the board's role is to identify the substance of the proposed amendment and craft summary language that accurately describes the amendment. Now, I also asked the spokesperson about whether this is a situation where LaRose, being a member of the current Redistricting Commission and someone who would be directly impacted by this ballot measure, if he should have recused himself from the vote or recused himself from drafting language that he then voted to approve, which was voted along party lines. Dan Lushik said, Ohio's Constitution specifies that the Secretary of State will serve on the ballot board. There's no basis whatsoever for him to recuse himself here. So we mentioned specifically an article of the Ohio Constitution. So we do have that, so we can read that to you exactly what it says on this.
Okay. The ballot language for such proposed amendments shall be prescribed by a majority of the Ohio Ballot Board, consisting of the Secretary of State and 4 other members, who shall be designated in a manner prescribed by law, and not more than 2 of whom shall be members of the same political party.
This is something that I wanted to discuss with Professor Enton, because that language, not more than 2 of whom shall be members of the same political party, was something that raised an eyebrow for me.
I didn't think about
because it's 3 to 2, and he pointed out the section of the Ohio Revised Code that's relevant here. It's section 3505.061A, which you can see on your screens. And it says that the 4 members of the ballot board should be appointed by the President of the Senate, the Minority Leader of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and the Minority Leader of the House. So it didn't raise an eyebrow for Professor Enton that it does end up being a 3-2 split, because he was talking about those not more than 2 of the same party. He said it seemed like the common sense interpretation was that that would refer to the 4 additional members.
And by nature, of course, that would always be the case, that whoever the Secretary of State is, whatever party they're from, would have the advantage in deciding what the ballot language is, because you'll have the 2 people on your side. So that's not a new situation.
No, it's not. No. And so that is how it is established who gets on the ballot board, because I was wondering about that, so I thought some other people might be wondering as well.
I'm happy to have heard about it.
Yeah. Now we want to go back to that provision of the Ohio Constitution that talks about the makeup of the ballot board, because it also talks about when ballot language is not okay. And the same section of the Constitution says the standard to reject ballot language must be found to mislead, deceive, or defraud the voters. So that's the standard that this lawsuit will be held to when it's reviewed by the Ohio Supreme Court.
Okay, so given that, what was the original proposed language that the Citizens Not Politicians submitted that was rejected?
Okay, I'm going to read it for you. We have a document that will show you, so you can take a look at that as I read along. It's a little small, but here's the words.
Just get up close.
Proposed constitutional amendment. The proposed amendment would establish the Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission, composed of 15 Ohio citizens, to draw and adopt Ohio General Assembly and Ohio congressional districts. Require that the commission consist of 15 members who have demonstrated the absence of any disqualifying conflicts of interest and who have shown an ability to conduct the redistricting process with impartiality, integrity, and fairness. Set forth that the commission shall operate in a transparent manner by requiring public hearings that invite broad public participation throughout the state, public displays of redistricting plans, and a public report explaining any plan the commission adopts. Provide that each redistricting plan shall contain single-member districts that are geographically contiguous, comply with federal law, closely correspond to the statewide partisan preferences of Ohio voters, and preserve communities. Require that all deliberations and actions of the commission shall be in public meetings, and all actions by the commission require an affirmative vote of at least 9 of 15 members. If passed, the amendment will become effective 30 days after the election.
All right.
So that's the language that got rejected. Now, in contrast, here's the language that the ballot board approved written by Secretary of State Frank LaRose and adopted along party lines, 3 Republicans to 2 Democrats.
Just a reminder, the goal of this is to not mislead, deceive, or defraud the voters, and this is trying to describe a anti-gerrymandering movement. To create an appointed redistricting commission is not elected by or subject to removal by the voters of the state. The proposed amendment would repeal constitutional protections against gerrymandering approved by nearly 3/4 of Ohio electors participating in the statewide elections of 2015 and 2018 and eliminate the longstanding ability of Ohio citizens to hold their representatives accountable for establishing fair state legislative and congressional districts. 2, establish a new taxpayer-funded commission of appointees required to manipulate the boundaries of state legislative and congressional districts to favor the 2 largest political parties in the state of Ohio, according to a formula based on partisan outcomes as the dominant factors, so that A, each district shall contain single-member districts that are geographically contiguous, but state legislative and congressional districts will no longer be required to be compact, and B, counties, townships, and cities of Ohio shall be divided across multiple districts, and preserving communities of interest will be secondary to the formula that is based on partisan political outcomes. Require that a majority of the partisan commission members, along with the state's 2 largest political parties. 4, prevent a commission member from being removed except by vote for their fellow commission members, even for incapacity, willful neglect of duty, or gross misconduct. 5, prohibit any citizen from filing a lawsuit challenging a redistricting plan in any court except if the lawsuit challenges the proportionality standard applied by the commission, and then only before the Ohio Supreme Court. Okay, 6, we're just going to go ahead and skip over 6, but 6 is real long. Just look at all 6.
It's very long.
Get it. 6. Okay, that's just a lot of numbers, but it's very specific. Let's go down to 7. Require the affirmative votes of 9 to 15 members of the appointed commission to create legislative and congressional districts. If the commission is not able to determine a plan by September 19, 2025 or July 15th of the year ending in 1, the following impasse procedure should be used. Then it goes into an impasse procedure. 8, limit the right of Ohio citizens to freely express their opinions of the commission or to the commission regarding the redistricting process or proposed redistricting plans.
Let's reread number 8 one more
Number
time.
8, limit the right of Ohio citizens to freely express their opinions to members of the commission or to the commissions regarding the redistricting process or proposed redistricting plans. We will step back to that. 9, require the commission to immediately create new legislative and congressional districts in 2025 to replace the most recent districts adopted by the citizens of Ohio through their elected representatives. We'll go back to that one too, because just a reminder, the maps that we are using right now have been declared unconstitutional and illegal by the Ohio Supreme Court, and we are still using them. So they were, yes, recently adopted by the citizens of Ohio and through their elected representatives, but not because we wanted them. All right, 10, impose new taxpayer-funded costs on the state of Ohio to pay the commission members, the commission staff, and appointed special masters, professionals, and private consultants that the commission is required to hire, and an unlimited amount for legal expenses incurred by the commission in any related litigation. If approved, the amendment will be effective 30 days after the election. So, I guess the question is, does that sound like a very accurate representation, not inflammatory? Does it seem like it's using the proper language? We're going to leave it up to you to decide. We're just here to present the facts, folks.
Yeah, and you can view this online. You can read it for yourself.
If you got the time.
If you have the time. It's quite lengthy. And so in light of all of this, that's why Citizens Not Politicians has filed a lawsuit against the ballot board here in the state of Ohio and Secretary of State Frank LaRose. And they have proposed new language. So we're going to show that to you just so you can take a look at it. Now, this new language is modeled after the ballot board language that was accepted. Mm-hmm. So you see there, item number 1, there's a strike through there, and this is available online as well. It's available in the court case. It's included in the lawsuit language because this is what they are suggesting the Ohio Supreme Court require as the ballot language. They're offering this as what they would like to see as the summary on the ballot.
Maintaining a lot of the nuts and bolts in there, as you can see, but just kind of removing anything that's very adjective-y, I guess, and maybe unnecessary, therefore.
For example, Professor Enton talked about advocacy words. The word manipulate is a word that has a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. The denotation of the word manipulate may not necessarily be negative, but the connotation is definitely negative, and a different word is change. Mm-hmm. Manipulate and change mean the same thing. roughly. Of course, there are different nuances depending on the context and the situation in which you're talking about. But that's just one example.
Definitely one of the most galling things in there that people are pointing out is that the ballot language describes issue 1 as repealing, quote, constitutional protections against gerrymandering approved by nearly 3/4 of Ohio electors in 2015 and 2018. Now, first of all, by putting the word gerrymandering, they're actually saying that they would be gerrymandering by doing this, the very thing that they're trying to overturn. And those gerrymandering protections that were approved by nearly 3/4 of Ohio electors that they're referring to are those same ones that we did approve, but then we gave them the maps and they said no. We don't like that map, and so that's why we're using illegal maps. So those protections did not work, the protections that they are referring to. So I think that a lot of people would just see this, at worst, it just keeps not working, I think, and that's where they're gonna have a hard time selling this, in my opinion.
Yeah. So this lawsuit is now before the Ohio Supreme Court, and it will be up to the Ohio Supreme Court. The Constitution of Ohio says the Ohio Supreme Court has jurisdiction to decide issues of ballot language.
What else we got for them?
That's it.
Okay, good.
That's it. It
So-
was all redistricting talk for you today.
Yeah, so you guys just digest that, think about it,
Soak it in.
and that's all we can do for you is just give you the information.
All right, everyone, enjoy your Wednesday and the rest of your week. We will see you back here next time on Ohio Has Issues.
Bye, guys.